Mission states the mission of the Exeter West Greenwich Regional School District is to empower students to contribute to school and community by providing a substantial learning experience in a safe, trusting, and motivated environment. The first section is open forum. Comments must be directed to the chairman of the school committee or may limit or terminate discussion. No comments shall address personal litigation or negotiations as restricted by open meetings regulation. School committee action or vote on topics or issues that are not reflected. Jim, could you give us a narrative on the consent agenda? Oh, do we have any individuals that would like to speak to you before? Your name?
Hi, I'm Crystal. My so I'm here. She enters kindergarten in 2 weeks. I will not mask my child, and they're
Ms. Welch.
Yeah.
Ms. Welch, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. That matter is already on the agenda. Items that are not on.
she enters kindergarten. Oh, really? I've not experienced that yet. I will not mask my child. So you're not allowed to talk about things that are on the agenda at the meeting?
No, you will have council school department items that are
You will
not.
have the opportunity to
Oh,
speak
really?
at the time of the
Okay.
agenda item.
I wasn't clear on that. Okay. All right, then I'll
You
speak at
certainly
that time.
have the opportunity.
Oh, okay. All
And
right.
anybody else that wants to speak during the mask policy segment of the meeting, there's a sign up list
Okay.
on the seat. So just pen in your name,
Okay.
address, town you're from.
All right, sorry about that.
Nice, that part of it. All right. Jim, could you proceed with the consent agenda?
Sure. Under consent, we have the approval of the regular meeting minutes from July 13th. We have several appointments that are listed there. I know some of the individuals are here today. I'll introduce. We have a leave of absence request from a custodian and several resignations, most of which were not expected. A recall, and that is to address 3D. The recall addresses that now vacancy. And we also have our monthly bills and then several homeschool approvals.
Anybody like to discuss any item that's on the consent agenda?
Can I please pull the minutes for a correction on one of my votes?
Personal. Okay. Need a motion to approve.
Less my vote in
Section 6. I make a motion to approve the consent agenda less the regular meeting minutes of July 13th, 2021. Second.
Section 6.
Anyone move the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Bills? Oh, I'm sorry. You want to talk about the minutes?
Please, thank you. Just section 6, unfinished business, the bylaws vote. Mine was a nay. It was aye. Thank you.
Bill? Oh, I'm sorry. Bring the minutes forward.
Bylaws vote.
Why is that tinkling always happening?
Every time someone signs in, things
There's no way to mute that,
trying, looking right now.
or just turn the volume down. Anyway, next on the agenda is bills. Does anybody have any? Concerns or issues to talk about?
Chairman Bennett, would Superintendent, you're not going to introduce the hires?
Sure.
So I'm not sure who is here this evening, but let me check. Jessica Wigan is here. She is a new .4 special education teacher at Metcalf, and she'll be taking over for a portion of an existing position through a job share. So Jessica, welcome. Karen Ross is not here.
Yes.
She's on, or is she online? Might be online, but she is taking over for a leave of absence for a part-time reading teacher at Metcalf. She's a retired reading specialist from Massachusetts who'll be joining us for the year. Michaela Pollum is here. She's a new special education teacher at Metcalf, a full-time special education teacher at Metcalf. Chrissy Borton. Chrissy. Chrissy is here. .6 social studies teacher at the junior high school. She's actually replacing a leave of absence for an individual who's going to URI for a placement at URI. And Shania Moretti. Shania is here, and she is .6 science at the junior high school, the other portion of that replacement for the person who's going to URI. So 2-year placement at the science program there. So welcome.
Welcome, everyone.
Next order of business, bills. Anybody wish to talk about the bills? It was? Yeah. Go on. All right. Correspondences. Does anybody wish to discuss any of the correspondence on the agenda? Yes. What do you think?
For correspondence number 2, Council 94, communication. Was there a reason what took place on the executive session? Can we just probably just kind of discuss in open session?
Because we needed a vehicle to put something in the executive session, and the school committee has never entered into negotiations with Council 94. So in order for us to open up negotiations with 94, we need to have that discussion and then have a vote to open up the contract. So we need a vehicle to have executive session. Right now, the school committee does not currently, the school committee has not voted moving forward to open up negotiations with 94.
Can I ask legal counsel on that?
Go right ahead.
Collective bargaining is certainly a warrants. It could be discussed in executive session if we're dealing with collective bargaining situations. Now, I'm not exactly sure where we stand with the Council 94 negotiations, if any, but to discuss it, I believe it could be placed on.
You're saying that, well, we haven't opened up negotiations with 94 by vote. So in other words, this is their contact to us, telling us they wish to enter into negotiations. We did not reach out to them, they reached out to us. We have not said that we are opening up negotiations with 94. Therefore, we do not have a means of entering into executive session until we do. You disagree with that?
I do. Let me.
That has been the practice of past. That is that we take a vote, decide to enter into negotiations, and then at times in the future, we enter into executive sessions to discuss with the committee where our positions are with any negotiations. I don't agree with how we did it in the past with the NEA contract. Got it?
Yeah, we didn't do that in any contract, but we're not opening up negotiations. It's a request for an extension.
If they're asking for more money, which they are, then that represents to me a change in contract. You don't agree with that?
We're not opening up the contract.
If they want to get a raise beyond the 36 months that's currently active during the last 12 months of that contract, that to me constitutes a change in contract because they're asking for an increase in pay. You don't feel that that constitutes a change in contract by asking for more pay?
I don't think that we need to take a vote to open up the contract.
I agree. But I will put it on the agenda if you so request, Ms. Pandy, in the next meeting. Is that what you're requesting?
I was going to discuss an open session because we're on general law 42465 says we may put an executive session if we don't have to.
Would you like to have,
I just want to ask some questions to the superintendent. Just so we have some information.
I believe what you want to have is discussion, not necessarily on the content of the contract, but the chairman is asking, are you requesting that we enter into negotiations, which means the material of the contract will change by virtue of the fact that they're probably asking for more money. Is that not correct? Ms. Pan?
I don't think we're opening up, but I don't want to take a vote to open up the contract, but I do want to address the request.
Feel free to comment at this time. It's on the agenda.
So I just wanted to ask the superintendent if an impact statement was prepared for the request for the extension for the salary increase.
So when we received it, we did do an impact statement in the event that it was requested. I don't have it with me.
It's just items I want to have ready for when we do discuss it. So an impact statement, and then a history of the salaries for the Council 94, and then a comparison with the Council 94 and the teachers union for salary increases. And then if you or Bob have any issues with any of the provisions in the current contract that need addressing, because that would determine obviously which we would take. Chairman Brown, I would request that we put this in executive session for the next meeting so we can have a discussion.
Again, I have to return to what I said earlier, is that if you want to enter into an executive session, the school committee has to recognize that it wants to open negotiations up with before. I'll return to that issue. So they're clearly the very essence and basis of contracts is to negotiate benefits and salaries. That is the fundamental property of contracts. To claim that we're not negotiating and they're asking for more money is beyond my ability. I assume at this point what you want to put on the agenda is that the school committee wants to have a discussion about entering into negotiations with me, which I think is a perfectly reasonable request. At that time, we can then enter executive session. I believe.
I don't want to open up the contract. Like, they're not asking for any changes in their current contract. What they're asking for is an extension of the current contract.
With additional money.
Yeah.
That is the very basis of contracts. The essence of contracts is to negotiate.
So I just request that
I have no idea what you're referring to.
I would request that it goes into executive session so we can discuss the topic in executive session.
We're discussing it now, and I think what's happened here
I'm
is.
not going to make a motion to open up the Council 94 contract
Why is that?
because we're not negotiating any of the terms in the current contract.
Just because you state something, madam, doesn't necessarily make it true. The very essence of this letter that's in your correspondence requires that they are asking for additional money.
I think you and I are going to agree to disagree, and we'll have to defer to legal counsel.
Sure.
Again, issues of collective bargaining are fair game for executive session. They do not have to go into executive session regarding it. They can be discussed in open session. It's certainly fair game. Now, whether or not, I would suggest that if you're talking about extensions, increased dollars, then certainly that could go into executive session.
Realize that there are 10 reasons why we can enter into executive session, correct? Nancy? One of them is negotiations. And the practice has been for the school committee, with the exception of the NEA that I took exception to, is that we vote to enter into negotiations as a public body. That has been the past practice.
And that is certainly fair. I do think that if you're going to respond to this letter and you're discussing the propriety of it, it's certainly something that would be right for executive session. Again, and I will discuss with Mr. Hennius your concerns about it and Mr. Andy. But as we sit here today, that would be my response.
All right, so we'll make
We'll wait
that.
for the legal, to.
Yes,
to-
we will make a decision on the agenda based on the advice we get from legal counsels.
Yeah,
Conference.
I'm good with that.
That's sufficient? Sure. Go ahead.
It would also be helpful to have a historical look at their contracts. So a summary of salary negotiations and benefits.
Historical salary and benefits.
Yeah,
or
the increases, I'm
Other
sorry.
things as well,
Historically, what's been increased.
specific to salary and benefits.
Correct, yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions under correspondence? All right, going to move on to budget projections 2020.
That's enclosed in the packet, in the school committee members packet is the final projection or for the fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2021. The next report would be the audit report, which will be a couple of months out. So we're moving into the 2022 fiscal year budget. But for 2021, what you have in hand, you can see that there's an improvement over the prior month's projection, showing that we have a projected unassigned general fund balance of 1.6 million. We had the commitments of 345,000 and the available from surplus that was used in the revenues of the budget of $320,000. Overall, very positive number for the district and shows that we weathered 21 pretty well considering everything that was thrown at us. So thank you for your support on that.
Next order of business is new business, and we are going to have the first reading for 7806 Universal Design Program.
Thank you. Policy 7806 would be a brand new policy, and this is specific to accommodations that we are allowed to and actually required to make for students who need access to their learning in different ways. There are certain accommodations and modifications that would be required through a document, 504 or an IEP document, but these are considered universal accommodations that should be made available to all students. If we're really looking to ensure students' learning, then they need to have access to the materials in the way that works for them. It is the law, but we've had many discussions about this particular topic, and the feeling of the administrators is that the teachers want to see it in writing as a policy in order for them to feel comfortable implementing. So that is the direction. This is consistent with the law, the Every Student Succeeds Act.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
So this kind of is a prohibition between the IEPs.
So in other words, if a child needs a graphic organizer, or a child needs an alternate format. Like if they prefer to see a hard copy versus a digital copy, they don't need a document, an IEP or a 504 plan in order to receive that accommodation. It doesn't rise to the level of accommodation or modification that necessitates a formal IEP or 504 document. So this is only specific to those kinds of accommodations, and it is for all children, including those that are considered general education children. So it's really just about giving kids what they need so they can learn best.
Anyone else? All right, next is 8711 face mask, face covering COVID-19, first reading, Jim.
So this has been quite the conversation. This was written several weeks ago based on guidance that was provided to us at the time. I know a lot has happened since the time of the writing of this draft. I was asked to produce a face mask policy. Actually, it is required for the reentry template that we needed to submit to the Department of Ed. At the time, the guidance said that face masks were recommended, but not required. I know that there have been some changes that have occurred since then. Last night, I held 2 community forums where I went over several items related to reentry, all about mitigation strategies, including the recommendation of this policy that will come to the school committee this evening. I went with a tiered approach and really to try to accommodate the very opposing perspectives of individuals in our community. I understand that while I was away on vacation, a new draft of the guidance came out, and I think it says something to the effect of school districts we are strongly recommending that school districts adopt a policy mandating masks from all individuals regardless of vaccination status. That's what it currently reads. It doesn't say that it's required, but the language was changed to be much stronger. Regardless, at last night's forum, we had, this is as of last night, 700 participants. That's between individuals that were on the Zoom meeting, the live Zoom meeting, the live YouTube, and then the number of views of the YouTube video that processed last night. So that added up to over 700 individuals or views of the presentation. The feedback that I received was as expected. There are individuals that are not in favor of masks at all. There are individuals that are requesting that we mandate masks for all adults and children, regardless of status. And there were many individuals last night that were appreciative of trying to come to some level of a compromise. So, and again, it's not a surprise. People's opinions on this matter are all over the place. So no matter what we do as a committee, there will be a segment of the population that is not completely satisfied. I tried to at least explain the rationale and at least provide as much information as possible so they could sit on it, think about it. And obviously we have some individuals that came tonight to the school committee meeting who might want to speak, but this is where we are. I am required to have a mask policy in place before the start of school. I need to submit it to the Department of Ed. So the first read is this evening. I'll take any input, advice, we'll make adjustments, and I'll bring it to the school committee for the second read next week.
Questions or comments from the committee? This is your opportunity to
Yes,
bring.
I have a comment. On the first page, when you go down to disease prevalence, disease prevalence refers to the number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 for 100,000 residents. It says in a given area. Can we add Exeter and West Greenwich? Change that to our policy during the past 7 years.
So we can, I think later in the policy where I talk about the,
Yeah, because the
The-
next page, I think it says.
It does say it.
Towns, but
Yeah.
I think that would be.
so for the purpose of this policy, we're referring to Exeter. That's right.
I assume like in 5, it is recommended that staff members provide proof of vaccination status. Also, it's recommended students provide proof. Recommended, that's to cover us for privacy laws.
Yeah, and actually, the school nurses who are practicing medical experts have access to the vaccination status through a public portal that is only available to practitioners, medical practitioners. So they actually already have access to the information about who is or is not vaccinated. That's something that was implemented, not by us, but by the Department of Health, so that we could track mandatory vaccines. But they have input vaccinations of COVID into that system. So it is available to us in the event that, for example, we were contact tracing and the rules about contact tracing are different depending on whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, meaning the rules about quarantine are different depending on if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. So it's an easy way for us to look up whether or not a child needs to quarantine as a result of being a close contact. If we know that they're vaccinated, they may not need to. So it's good information to have. It kind of speeds up the process so that we can isolate and quarantine as quickly as possible. So when I wrote this, I was not aware that the vaccine status, the COVID vaccine status was in the system. I know. So it wouldn't be necessary for anybody to give us an extra document.
Then on page 7, face coverings. In the 3rd paragraph, a physician's note cannot excuse mask wearing. Why is that? I should think it would be the physician's note shall excuse.
So what this is saying is that a physician cannot just write a note saying no mask for this child. There has to be an underlying medical condition, in which case you go through a formal process where you have to write an individual medical plan for that child or a 504 plan for that child, because there's some diagnosis where the mask the child can't wear the mask because of that medical condition. And then there are additional or alternative kinds of mitigation strategies that could be put in place. That's a strategy that we used last year. We did have a couple of students in the district that could not wear a mask. We went through the meeting process, documented the condition, and then documented the alternative mitigation strategies. So it doesn't prevent a doctor from providing input, but they can't just write a script for it because that's not the process.
And then I wanted to change on the top of recommendations during flow transmission. During periods of low transmission, those members parents shall decide if their child will wear a face covering, whether vaccinated or not. Guests and visitors who are not vaccinated shall wear a face mask when entering the district facility. That change that first paragraph. And my reasoning behind this is 0 to 9. It's not even 1% of 0 to 9 for 100,000 people. That's a low amount. I don't think that, and I don't think that that's any reason to be where everyone should be, or just vaccinated people should be there. Because it's not even 100%. Contribution research. Also, it's based on there are only 2 tests, or 1 test actually, that's been done in this entire state, and that was with the Valley Department of Health. So I've never conducted any tests on this. It was 50 kids, and we had them ask for 30 minutes. That was it. That's the only test. And that was the Valley Department of Health. So I don't think that basing masking, this one study. That's very much what the study. We're asking kids to wear masks.
Joe, all the speakers on? Right.
Diane probably didn't have this. Diane probably doesn't have a speaker on.
As long as your green button's down.
Yeah,
you
the green
might-
button.
You have to turn your knob though too.
It's turned now. All right.
Just put it on. You couldn't hear anything she just said. I'm sure it was important, but I couldn't hear it.
I can repeat it. Is that better than? Yeah, I wanted to change that first paragraph to during periods of low transmission in both member towns, parents shall decide if their child will wear a face covering, whether vaccinated or not. Guests and visitors who are not vaccinated shall wear a face mask when entering a district facility. Children will not. Part of my reasoning is the COVID, well, there are a couple of reasons. The COVID test in and of itself is being pulled in December, the test that they're using now, the PCR test, because there have been too many false positives tests, and they're going to replace it, I guess, with another test. That's one reason. And another reason is they did only one study, and they're always saying based on the science, but only one study was done. Ride never did any studies. And the Department of Health did one study on masking in children, which involved 50 children. And it was one 30-minute time they had the mask on. We're asking kids to wear a mask all day long. And that's the second reason. And the third reason is it's very difficult for children, especially in those younger grades, the ones that, we're asking, people are asking them to mask later on. It's very difficult for them to learn with their mask. So those are basically my reasons for this. Simple discussion.
Chairman, if I say one thing, we're not voting tonight, so can Robin or take down the changes that a member would like?
I'm right.
Or you want to write down? Okay. So, because I don't really want to change what's written in here. Diane's suggesting a different language, but we're not voting tonight, so I don't want the policy to come back with the new language that somebody wants. Let's have this policy and then an amended version, if you will. If that's okay. We're going to have a couple different votes.
So you highlighted things back and forth with Diane bringing the changes.
And if there are any others up with the.
Sure. Yeah, all right, very good.
Thank
And then
you.
we'll just vote on it. Yes, based on an individual basis, those changes, and then the overall.
And then I have one other thing. I'm sorry. It was where we were talking. About when they do have to wear the mask. That mask breaks should occur at least every hour throughout the day for individuals wearing a mask. And maybe for discussion more often for smaller children. Because I just think it's, one break all day long. Got to take those things off.
So it's in section 6 under face coverings. The paragraph reads, mask breaks should occur throughout the day for individuals who are required to wear a mask. Breaks should occur when students can be appropriately socially distanced based on minimum requirements for ride out. And in the policy it also says when they're outdoors, social distancing changes like that. I mean, it's easier to take them outside.
That's why I'm saying, especially this time.
Yes.
Everything. They can go outside at least once every hour.
And we did do that throughout the school day throughout last year. Many teachers take advantage of outdoor learning spaces that we have set up at every campus, outdoor mask breaks, and that they did that very well last year. So it wouldn't be a change in practice if masks are required.
So I know we hate because all classes are different, all grades are different, but would it be too much to ask to quantify the number of breaks that we should expect in a given day? Right now, it just says we'll have.
Yeah, I'm just writing.
Sure.
I'd have to do some thinking on that. I mean, for example, if the kids already have built-in breaks because it's recess. The kids have phys ed. The kids have, right? So there are already times throughout the day that they're learning, but they're also outside without a mask. So it really would vary on how many additional separate mask breaks would be necessary, depending on how often the teacher is utilizing the outdoor learning space, whether the kid has phys ed on that day that's outdoor, when recess occurs during the day. At the younger grades, they often have 2 recess periods already built in, which is not a break, but it's an exercise where they're not wearing masks, right? So I would have to just do some thinking about
If
that.
you could, because they don't always get phys ed. It's free. It's every day occurring.
It's not.
It's not. So
Yeah.
if it would help, I think, the community, the parents, even the kids, the teachers, if we had some kind of like, hey, it's a minimum of 2 breaks a day, sometimes more, just something if we quantify that. And to Diane's point, maybe the younger kids may need more. It's running out of it. So. Are we doing it that end? Does anybody else have any?
Oh, I have one.
Oh, okay.
This is just also out here. During moderate transmission, it's not even 1% for the first one. And the second one is 10 to 49 cases per 100,000 students. So I would like to just continue with what I said for the first phase for that one, putting during periods of low transmission, during periods of moderate transmission, and either member town fully equips. During periods of moderate transmission. Why was it either?
So, because if in the first one, it says both member towns, because if one town is substantial and the other one is low, and all of the kids go to the same school, then it's problematic. And in this case, it says moderate in either member town. Because it's for the same reason, right? If there's one town that's low, but another town that's substantial, that's a problem because all the kids are mixed together. That's why it's separate.
I would rather have that because I still think it's a very low percentage. I would like to have that also. Parents shall decide if their child will wear a face cover when vaccinated. Also have, visitors.
You basically want section 4 to be for periods of low and moderate transmission. That's what you're asking for.
Yes.
That's what I wrote.
Changes.
You good?
Yeah.
So, would anybody else like to be recognized? Sure, go ahead, Miss.
So I attended both sessions last night. That was really powerful, the level of support, and you addressed every single parent question that they put, whether it was on YouTube or in the chat. I did take the opportunity to survey both just to see what parents generally were feeling. And while yes, I think we have parents in polar opposite areas, what the overall sense I got is that parents want kids in school and they want them educated. And I think that's something that we really have to take seriously. So the other part that also has been brought to my attention, I think I was very aware of the number of kids that we have that are high risk in this school, but we've received a number of emails as well about children that if they get COVID, there is no treatment. So there is no vaccine and there's no treatment at the children's hospital. They will be given oxygen. And there's a number of kids that I know personally in our school district that if they got COVID, that's exactly where they would be. So when it comes to the recommendation from the school committee, I passionately believe that it is our requirement as a school body, and especially a school governing group, to educate all children and to protect them. So when we want to make recommendations, I think within a low transmission, I feel very comfortable in that realm. And that we would strongly recommend that they wear a mask and allow parents to make decisions against that. But I'm fearful if we're not making that recommendation, who are we? How are we educating these kids? And the other side of that, to open that up to moderate spread, we're talking about community, not kids. So it's the community as a whole within Exeter and West Greenwich. And while I appreciate our spread has been low, our children don't stay within our borders. So I think being conservative about moderate, and we can always make changes to things later, but I'm seeing amongst many states that opened up without mask policies, kids are quarantined. They're not being educated. Kids are in hospitals and kids have died. And it's just not a risk I'm willing to take. So those two areas, the rest I really appreciate, and I always appreciate your input. But I would like to just kind of state those two concerns that I have with those two recommendations. Thank you.
I'm not entirely sure. Jim, did you understand what the recommendations were?
I just recommended that we don't make those two changes, that we keep the low transmission section as is. But I appreciate the mask break, everything else, just the low transmission rate staying as is and not changing.
All right, so essentially, the next reading would not support that.
Correct.
Any other members of the school committee have any questions or comments at this time? Sandy.
This one to Superintendent Yanakis already mentioned this, but under the scope, so if this policy defines and sets forth the Exeter West Greenwich School District response to guidance set forth by the Rhode Island Department of Health to the safe return of all students to in-person learning in the 2022 school year. The CDC recommendations state. So Jim, if you could change that to, as of today on their website, given new evidence on the B.1.617.22 Delta variant. CDC has updated the guidance for fully vaccinated people. CDC recommends universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to the K-12 schools regardless of vaccination status. So if you update that. And then down where you have, as stated in the joint release of the pre-K to 12 health and safety guidance for 21-22 school year by RIDE and RIDO. So RIDE and
Can you
RIDO
just, I just want to make sure that I know where you are. Is it
Yeah.
page 1 or page 2?
under our scope. I just want you to change.
Oh,
our
still
scope.
under scope. Okay.
It's all under scope.
Yep.
So RIDO's new guidance along with RIDE as of July 29th. We strongly recommend that school districts set a policy that requires masking in schools this fall, regardless of vaccination status, in direct correlation with the CDC guidance. So we're now following the CDC guidance.
So as I said, this policy was written prior to the release
Yeah.
of that updated the updated document, and therefore those quotes are now out of date. So
Yeah,
I'm
that's right.
basically just updating
Just update
the
the
quotes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the school committee follows, I mean, we usually follow RIDO, RIDE, and CDC for health decisions. So I want to make sure that our scope is stated correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Griffiths, please.
Thank you. Just one question for the administration. Students who are in quarantine or in isolation, there is no virtual option for them,
Correct.
correct? This year, correct. Just checking. Thank you.
I think I have just an observation. We don't cover, unless I'm mistaken, the actual act of vaccination. And as the population, at some point, they're going to authorize vaccinations for children under the age of 12. Right. And there will be periods where a subpart of the population will be vaccinated and the part of the population is not. Do we address that in any way, or should we address that when it comes to vaccination?
So, right now, the students that are eligible for the vaccine are age 12 and older, which happens to be a perfect cut point for our school buildings. It's grade 7 and up, so it's one building. And while I didn't talk about the increase in the age groups that could be vaccinated, the policy for masks references fully vaccinated versus unvaccinated students. So if they become vaccinated, they now fall into a different category. That's how it's covered.
So if I'm a fully vaccinated child, do I have to wear a mask even though my neighbor, my student to my right, whatever reason is not?
So the way that the policy is written, it depends on the transmission rate. So if it's high transmission or substantial, the way that the policy is currently written, yes, everybody has to wear a mask regardless of status. Again, the way the policy is currently written, moderate is required only for unvaccinated. So if they expand the age group, then they become part of the group that would be vaccinated, and therefore it's not required, it's optional.
It's optional in the context of the classroom. So there's a population that's both vaccinated and unvaccinated within the classroom. That means those that are vaccinated would not wear a mask, and those that have not been would be.
Yeah. Those that are unvaccinated would be required to. Those that are vaccinated, it would be optional. We have a lot of parents who have been very clear that it doesn't matter if they're vaccinated or not, they're requiring their children to wear masks. So it's going to be happening across the board at all levels, that kids will be wearing masks. Regardless of our recommendation.
Is there any potential of, I know the school was involved in creating a sponsorship of vaccination through the school system. Do we plan on having anything like that?
Yes.
Once it's been authorized for.
Yes. So we've actually already had some drive-through clinics this summer on top of what we offered last year. I mean, we did the vaccination clinics for our children and also for our staff last year. They were all held at Coventry High School. But we had drive-through clinics right here, right outside of Metcalf. And there's actually 2 more that are scheduled in August. So anybody in the community that wishes to get vaccinated, we're not requiring it. We can't require it at this point. But anybody that wishes can just go to the drive-up clinic and get their vaccination. That's happening. I don't have the 2 dates in front of me, but it's next week, I think, and the week after.
Well, you can remember what it was like when the initial vaccinations were
Yes.
made available.
Yeah,
There was a
oh,
little bit of,
Chaos.
chaos, and that was mitigated by the Coventry
Right.
sponsorship and bringing your staff and whoever get vaccination. So it's very organized. It's very good. I think everybody would admit that.
Yeah.
So my question would be, is there anything like that being contemplated when they decide that 11 and under?
Yes, so I work really closely with the EMA directors from the 2 towns, particularly the Exeter EMA director. And if they expand the age eligibility, then we would put together a clinic where any parent that wishes to bring their child for vaccination, we would offer it. They wouldn't have to travel all across the state trying to find a vaccine, but we would do it locally. And it would be outside of school hours so that parents, because of that, at that age group, we would require parents to be present while the vaccine was being administered. So yes, we will do that.
I think that would be a great benefit to the community. That way,
Yes.
everybody goes in, they know what day they can get vaccinated.
Which vaccine?
I don't know because I don't even know which one will be authorized for younger children. I know when we ran the clinics for our students here and for our staff, it was Pfizer. But I really don't know.
And does that include both shots?
Yes.
Just like-
Yeah, when we did it for staff, I mean, I got my vaccine through the clinic that we offered to our staff here. And we scheduled both appointments, the 3 weeks or 4 weeks apart, whatever the requirement was. And easy. So that's how we would do it for the younger groups too.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? Robin, reach back and get the sign up list for public regarding policy. So I'm going to put what I call a reasonable limit on anybody's comments. So I doubt very much we'll reach that threshold. But anyway. The first one on the list is Crystal Welch.
Hi, everybody. My name is Crystal. First, thank you all for allowing us to speak tonight. I appreciate that. I do want to comment on a couple of things that were mentioned. I do want to mention that the child death rate when it comes to COVID is extremely low. It's actually lower than the flu and RSV. So I think we need to be mindful of that. Also, children getting extremely sick is also very, very rare from COVID. So I'm here tonight because my daughter is 5 years old, so she's entering kindergarten, and I will not mask her. There are multiple reasons why I will not mask my child, but I will start with the educational impacts that it has on children, specifically young children, my daughter's age, who are learning how to read, write, spell, and enunciate. I have spoken to numerous elementary education teachers as well as speech pathologists who all say the same thing. When they're trying to teach our children, their faces are covered. Our children aren't learning. So my question is, why am I going to send my child to school if they're not going to learn? My second point, and I think the most important point, is the mental impacts that these masks are having on our children. The suicide rate in children has dramatically increased over the past 18 months. One hospital reporting a 250% increase in child suicide. That should alarm everybody. Along with that comes depression and anxiety. Our children are overwhelmingly depressed and anxious. We have to ask ourselves what we're doing. Nobody's questioning the effects of the masks on our children. The only thing people are focusing on is COVID, 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 and we know that COVID is mild in children. My last point is the obvious, which is the physical health effects on children. Our children are sitting in masks for 7 hours a day, breathing in their own CO2. That lowers their blood oxygen level, which in some studies indicates that it can lead to cardiovascular issues as well as brain cell damage. Children are coming home complaining of nausea, headaches, sore throats. One woman I talked to, her child got a massive staph infection on her face. I just spoke to a woman earlier whose children, both of them are asthmatic and suffered through school last year until the point that she had to pull them out. I know that everybody's listening to the CDC and they're listening to the state, but at some point you have to question, do they have our children's best interest in mind? Because at this point, I don't think so. I really don't. So I'm just asking you all to do the right thing. We've been doing the wrong thing for 18 months with the isolation, the draconian measures that are put on our children, these masks. Do the right thing. We have a chance to go forward and start setting it straight and reversing the damage that we've done already. Thank you all very much. I'm passionate about this, so I appreciate you letting me talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Kevin Robinson.
So, good afternoon, committee, superintendent. Real quick, I just want to say, Mr. Anakis, I appreciate what you're doing with the transparency, the community outreach. Anytime I've ever had to get in touch with you, you've gotten right back with me. I just wanted to say a couple quick things here tonight. I have an 11th grader, I have a 3rd grader, I have a 4-year-old that's about to go into preschool, and I got a 2-year-old son that's going to be entering the system. I have a huge investment in this community through my children, and masks should not be our children's passport to education, period. That's how I feel about it. I just want to give you a definition real quick, because I looked it up and I'm trying to explain this to my children. And he's asking about Lynham and he's excited, and we're in this transition period about masks. You probably all have your decisions made, whether you're going to vote yes or no. And I just want to tell you what fear is on the dictionary. An unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or threat. And I'm not going to send my child his first day of school to live in fear. The masks. My daughter went through this last year. We had COVID. She was home for 24 days doing distance learning, learned absolutely nothing. Then we had a winter break. Then she contracted COVID, was home another 10 days. Enough is enough. This should be our choice. I'm not going to come back and say, hey, my child got COVID. I hold you responsible. It's my responsibility. It's my choice. And this is a tough decision. And I know everybody's not going to be happy. But one way you could settle the difference is it's the parent's choice. It's my children. If I send them, I'll take responsibility for it. This doesn't have to be a legality issue or anything like that. If someone wants to send their child with a mask, put the mask on. These masks, everybody up here, the CD says they're no good for anything. It needs to be an N95 mask. Try putting one on a 4-year-old so they can wear it all day. It's an unrealistic expectation to have. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Next is Meredith Fortunate. That's that properly. Okay.
Good evening, Superintendent, members of the school committee. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Meredith Fortunate, and I reside in West Greenwich and have a 7-year-old who will be attending Metcalf in September. I've sent you all an email on August 6th, and I hope you all read that and my feelings towards pro-choice masking. I just wanted to say a few more words about masking other than what I've stated in my letter to you. I, as a parent, feel it should be our choice to mask our children and nobody else's. This is our right as a citizen, and most importantly, it is our right as a parent. Our children need to attend school in the most normal way possible, and mandating masking is wrong on so many levels. The effects of masking children go on and on, as I'm sure you're all aware, including increase of anxiety and depression, not learning basic social skills, breathing in their own CO2 for 6 to 7 hours a day, which in turn causes headaches, nausea, sore throats, staph infections. As I know you're all aware, the CDC guidelines strongly recommend that students and staff wear masks regardless of vaccination status. But per the recommendation, this is specifically for areas that have substantial or high transmission rates and is not a blanket call for universal masking. There still continues to be much confusion and inconsistencies in the guidelines put forth. I attended the virtual public forum last night by the superintendent, and I just have a few comments. When I checked the Rhode Island Department of Health website last night, West Greenwich has a total of 593 cases since the beginning of COVID, which equates to roughly 1 positive case per day, 20 hospitalizations, and which equates to 1 hospitalization every 2 months and 0 deaths. These are the lowest numbers in the entire state. So I'd like to know what determines a good week, masks optional, versus a bad week, mask mandated. How much lower do these numbers need to come down before masks are not required? From the beginning of COVID, it has always been stated, trust the numbers. So why, with EWG's numbers so low, are we not following the numbers? Johnston and Charahoe have voted mass choice. As of last night, Johnston had a total of 4,931 total cases, 161 deaths, and 329 hospitalizations, far exceeding our numbers. How on earth could Johnston vote mass choice and not EWG, the town with the smallest numbers of all? How does that even make sense? The superintendent last night spoke at the beginning of the public forum that there are 2 sides that are divided, the pro-maskers and the anti-maskers. The only answer to that is mask choice. Parents that are worried for their children catching COVID, i.e. sniffles, runny nose, possible fever, can mask them up. And parents who are not can mask them down. This is our choice. And as Governor McKee said at his press conference last week, 90% of teachers are vaccinated in the entire state. So tell me, how does your fear fall on the backs of our children? I do understand that superintendents and school committee members are in a difficult position as opinions and guidelines shift with the media and the whims of the CDC. However, the data has been clear since last summer in regard to in-person learning that schools are safe for both children and staff, regardless of vaccination status. As a parent, I cannot simply mask my child indefinitely without any off-ramp in sight. There are vaccines available for adults and children over 12. There is no guarantee a EUA vaccine will be approved for under 12 because there is no emergency in this age group. There must be an exit to forced masking. It cannot go on and on for years over a virus with a survival rate of 99.997 in people under 19. Once again, I implore you, please make masks optional for our children when you vote. Our children need that. This fear mongering and obstructing our kids' airways needs to stop. Thank you all for listening.
There is water available on one of the tables if anybody see the need for it. Lee Gardner. Ms. Gardner.
Hello, most of you know who I am. For those that don't, I'm Amy Gardner, and I was once a member on this very board. I'm sure those that know me know that I'm coming up here with a no questions asked. This needs to be a choice perspective. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that the Rhode Island Department of Education is also doing a public meeting this evening at the same time as your meeting about masks. So I'm going to read a couple of points that I sent to that council, even though the Department of Education is not making a choice across the state and it is on each district to decide. Specifically, why has it become the norm to expect children to bear the weight of adult fears in public schools? We have humongous skyrise buildings of employment. We have larger numbers of employees in buildings than we do students in buildings. But we are discussing the masking and the bearing of the weight for the better of the community on children. We are literally putting the weight of the situation on children when their risk is little to none. Also, we need to think about the enforcement that wasn't discussed between you guys. Part of what was discussed within this policy at one point, once you reach a certain threshold, is unvaccinated being required versus vaccinated being required. There is no legal way to enforce that because that creates a medical privacy rights issue. You cannot show every other student in that classroom one child's privacy rights of choice of their parents over another. So you create a situation where trying to enforce it breaks the law of their medical privacy paper rights. Also, the implication as stated before, the neurological development. There is more than one study easily available that shows wearing these masks for long periods of time, or specifically oxygen deprivation at lower levels for long periods of time, has neurological negative impacts. So yes, we're talking about COVID and preventing a spread of an illness. But what we're not talking about is how these very policies have larger, more negative, bigger impacts overall. And Lena is going to be speaking after me, so I'll let her speak about it. But she did a public act request of documentation from the Rhode Island Department of Health, which Diane mentioned earlier. Because in order for the Department of Health to be making these policies, according to what was emailed from Governor Raimondo before she was no longer the governor, was that these were transparent, data-based policies. Transparent, transparent, transparent. When asked over and over again to provide the data that was basing these policies, they did not, until it was legally required of them because of the public request. And the only thing that the Department of Health was basing these recommendations on was a 30-minute study with less than 50 kids. So as much as you guys are referring back to the Department of Health, sometimes we need to literally scrutinize what are they doing, because they have no data that says this is a good thing to do. So thank you for your time.
Next is.
I'm sending this Is this working? It was really hard to hear before. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. So I would like to present some data to everybody tonight, some actual real numbers. Between Exeter and West Greenwich combined, there have been a total of 57 hospitalizations during this entire 17 months of the pandemic, including the Delta variant. Total, 57 total over 17 months. In addition to that, the hospitalization rate in Rhode Island for a minor, anyone under the age of 18, is 0.001%. So that means we've had maybe 1 or 2 kids hospitalized total during this entire duration of time. We also know for certain, based on the numbers, that we've had absolutely 0 children die of COVID in Rhode Island, period. And these are just facts. These are not fear, these are not speculations. That's actual data. What we also know is that the 4th leading cause of death for adolescents in Rhode Island right now is suicide. And it has exploded over the past 1.5 years. We cannot continue to ignore the effects of restrictions on children when they are literally, actually, according to the data, more likely to take their own life than to die of COVID. We need to balance what we're doing to them. I would like to know where the safety data is. As it was mentioned before, I did submit an APRA request to the Department of Health, to RIDE, and to the governor's office for the safety data that they use to determine that a child can wear a mask for a 7-hour school day for 10 months. And I was really, really shocked by the responses that I received. RIDE responded to me immediately and told me that they have absolutely no data whatsoever of any kind, and I have that confirmation in writing, and they deferred to DOH. DOH was able to produce a grand total of one study. It was an Italian study of 47 children total. They wore a mask for 30 minutes, the end. What was very interesting was that after 30 minutes, or after 15 minutes of walking, not running, not exercising, just walking, they had elevated heart rates, which causes cardiovascular damage when you're doing that indefinitely. We actually have quite a bit of data at this point showing the impacts of mask wearing on children around the world. The only known database of masking children, it was conducted in Germany this year during the academic year. It included nearly 26,000 children. It was a nationwide database. They wore a mask for 7-hour school days. 68% of families reported impairments from mask use. That's over 2/3 of them. And DOH is holding up one study of 47 children against that, in which they wore a mask for 30 minutes to say that it's safe. Where is the data that negates the science that we do have that already exists? In addition, I heard mention of other schools in other states that lifted mask mandates. I wanted to let you know that the states that lifted mask mandates last May, all of them saw a decline in COVID cases throughout the rest of the school year. And I can list several of them right here: Iowa, South Carolina, Vermont, Oklahoma. There were countries in Europe that opened schools after just a couple of weeks of closures back in May of 2020, April and May of 2020, and they did not have mask mandates, and they saw absolutely zero effect on their COVID cases. Norway is an example in which they will not close their schools again because reopening without masks had no effect on COVID rates. Sweden and Denmark have said the same thing because it also had no effect. And I want to know what the metrics are for releasing our children, because as of right now, we have absolutely none. And what really alarmed me, I didn't even introduce myself. I'm a public school teacher and I have 3 school-age children. I saw what it looked like in June. I felt it. I was there. I was with them. When this feels wonderful compared to what my classroom felt like in late June, when it was 90+ degrees with a heat wave. Kids had sweat rolling down their faces and they were literally suffocating. I was watching suffocation happening. And we had COVID rates of 0.3% for those 2 last weeks of June. That's less than 1/3 of 1%. So if that wasn't enough to unmask our children, what is? When will this end? And we mentioned the hospitalization rates for children and the hospitalizations in the 2 towns combined. What I'm wondering is, why can't our metrics be based on hospitalization rates rather than cases? The vast majority of our kids are asymptomatic, and I saw that personally teaching in a high school. Why aren't we basing this on the number of hospitalizations? That would be a serious case, as opposed to a mild asymptomatic infection, which would then, in the long run, produce immunity. It seems to me like that would be in the best interest of children. And just as a hospital prioritizes the infirm and a nursing home prioritizes the elderly, schools should be prioritizing kids. Not the community as a whole, but children. And I know I've used up plenty of my time and I said you can watch. Thank you very much for your time and for giving us the opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Mr. Smith.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Smith, and I really appreciate the opportunity to stand in front of you this evening. And just to ask a few questions. I don't expect that you will answer these questions. They're more rhetorical thought. But sitting here and listening to your reading or some reading and the comments of members, a few things stood out in my mind. One of those things was the fact that we are trying to create a safe environment for children. And that doesn't mean some children or children who have had the virus and therefore have some degree of immunity to it, or children who have parents who wear masks or have vaccines versus parents who don't wear masks or don't have vaccines, people who have a lot of interaction with people from all over the state versus people who have no interaction with people outside of their household. There's a lot of different variables that go into risk. And I have other options for education. If you choose to do something with Exeter West Greenwich education that I can't live with, then I have other options. Not everybody here or in the town has other options. I think it's the responsibility of the public school system to provide a safe space. I think there's a lot of rhetoric going around. I think I hear a lot of people mentioning this study or that study, but I work in research and I've looked around some, and some of the studies are, small. Other studies are large but non-scientific. I think that we need to defer a little bit to the people who spend their lives working on this stuff rather than making the assumption that what we think or what we hear supersedes what they know. Do you think that, that there's a large contingent of people in the country whose aim it is to force our children to have a substandard learning environment? I don't think that's the case. So we can stand here or we can sit and we can talk about what we think. But in reality, what we think isn't necessarily correct. And I'll include myself in that too. Maybe not everything I think is correct either. However, you have to be really careful in today's social environment that you're not just listening to people who think what you think, that you're not just interacting with people who say what you say and believe what you believe. Because if you are, you're only getting one side of the story. I would like to think that all of you here are looking at both sides of the story. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. And nothing I say here today is likely to change that. But it would be a great thing for everybody involved to have the impression that that you are listening to everybody's concerns. But in the end, you need to look at what is real and what is driven by outside influences. Yes, there's not a person here that spoke tonight that doesn't believe what they have spoken about. And that's fine, that's great, that's democracy. Sometimes, however, it falls to you to make a very tough decision based on real data, real science, not impressions. If you can't look up a reference to the studies that you are talking about, then those studies don't exist. In the end, I hope you will do that. I hope you'll spend the time. And once again, I really appreciate the time in front of you. Thank you. this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, by the way.
Yeah.
It's the idea that people have the right to tell other people what they should think.
You want that on my client. That's what we.
I have a situation. Okay, and so you are not.
If I may,
No choice.
This is not a productive.
if I may, we have to move on. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Alicia Cranston.
Hi, thank you. Alicia Cranston, West Greenwich, and I have two children that are still in the school system. One just graduated, so I've been through the process the last few years, and was part of the forums last night. And I think a lot of this was addressed in how we are working to also take care of our environment. And I think our administration and our school committee have invested a lot in, I guess, the environment of creating a safe environment for us. Air systems, the mitigation, the people that are working to clean every day. And I think that is part of the job that needs to be looked at, that we are doing all of those things. And that is what's on our plate, is to provide that safe environment. And you're doing that. Now it's the parents' jobs to make the decisions. I guess the decisions that are health decisions for ourselves and for our children. And you're never going to be able to make everybody happy. And we look at the tiered system that's being proposed. I think there's a lot of strength to that. And I love the conversation around looking at the differences. We're looking at the percent to moderate, maybe to move that to the lower tier that was addressed. And I think that that's a strong suggestion from a parental standpoint in keeping our children safe, but also keeping us in a strong learning environment. If we become elevated to the point that we're in a dangerous zone, then the school needs to step in and create that environment again that's more safe, where we were 17 months ago. But when we're in an environment that we're doing everything physically we can to create a safe environment, and we're in a low or a moderate zone, giving that choice to us as parents and as adults, whether we mask or don't mask, whether we get vaccinated or don't get vaccinated, I think is where we are in this country. That's where we live. Making that a mandate, to me, is a hard thing to understand when we live where we do, if we're not in a severe and dangerous zone. And I think we have a community that is looking out for each other, and we need to appreciate that. And I like the idea, as I sat last night looking at the percentages of numbers of positive cases versus hospitalizations versus deaths. And I feel like we need to look at the hospitalization rate more. When are we entering that serious standpoint? We all get sick. We all get colds. We all get the flu. And there's things we can do to prevent all those things. But we don't mandate everyone to get the flu shot. We don't mandate everyone to go out and take a cold medicine. It's a choice right now. It's not a mandated vaccine. It's not a required vaccine. It's not even an approved vaccine right now. So those are things that I think we need to look at closely and hard when we make a decision of what we require. And I appreciate the difficult task when we have to keep everyone safe. But I think some of the more serious numbers need to be part of that equation, not just a percent positive, because we're all gonna get sick. Actually, we want to, so that we can build that immunity a little bit at a time in a natural state. And I think it's a healthier view all the way around. But I think the most serious thing we need to look at is, are we in a safe environment? And we are. We're lucky, we're in PWG where we are safe.
Next is Crystal Green.
I'll leave my mask on based on the previous comments. Hopefully you can hear me. Sure. So Crystal Green, and I'm a professor at the University of Rhode Island. I'm the president of the Down Syndrome Society of Rhode Island. And I'll turn my back to you for a moment, just to give perspective to the parents that are in here. I agree with you on personal choice, whether they vaccinate their children or not, whether they wear a mask or not. However, not everyone is that lucky, right? So my son is 10.5. He's deaf, he's blind, he's severely autistic. I'm diagnosed at age 2, which doesn't happen typically. He aspirates on every exit, and he can only keep contact. So he basically lives up at the stops for every meal. I say all of that because you're blessed and you're lucky with parents of healthy children. So it may not cross your mind that there are other children in this district that don't have the healthy needs like this one. So like I told you, the statistics of how many children are hospitalized, how many children have died. That's because families like mine stay in their house. Benjamin has 3 other siblings, a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and an 11-year-old. 2 of them were hospitalized and badly for over 6 months because of mental illness, because we could not, for the safety of Ben, allow them to hang out with friends or play sports. Because if Ben did have COVID, he would die. I would say that again. He would die. And he's not able to wear a mask because of the opposite. That's how while at Austin Children's. So I really just want to try and broaden the horizon. There aren't many people with significant disabilities such as this in our community. Every time I take them out or stare at, children are me, much more difficult. So that would help children and the vaccine or not, we used to have a mask wear or not. You know that those choices trickle down and affect people like us. Here, I've kept Ben out of school. By law, he is eligible for preschool here at Lynham or elsewhere because of all his disabilities, but I don't send him because he has masks. So I just wanted to comment because I've been playing email tag with you, Dr. With Sarah Dens, with Ralph Corsi, about a deal that we made outside of Ben's IEP in January that has been ignored. And I won't say it here because I respect you, but I can't.
It hasn't been ignored, but we can talk
It
about
has been ignored because it hasn't been paid. And it was told to be brought up to this board, which I don't know. Anyhow, we are supposed to be getting services for Ben for his vision. Again, he's blind. We're supposed to be getting an orientation and mobility specialist in our home. None of these things have happened except for the vision eval. And basically they were floored at the level of Ben's disability. And they spent almost 4 hours in our home just trying to get to know Ben because of the paperwork that we sent into the school to explain him. The diagnosis that I told all of you listed on a piece of paper are very different than when you see a child in person. Right, so Ben is not fit to come to the school. He's not healthy enough to come to the school. But I still find that we're not receiving the services. And because of COVID, I still now again, with this mask policy of parents' choice, I'm not able to allow Ben a free education that he so deserves. So Andrea, Monroe, I really appreciate the comments that you were stating, because you were talking about children like my son. And again, I think most people in the community don't realize that children like this exist or don't realize the impact of COVID. It's not even COVID. That was the flu, which he has twice. He was hospitalized for over 2 weeks at Boston Children's Hospital. We almost lost him over the flu. We vaccinated him for the flu. He almost died as a reaction to the flu shot. So it's very serious. It's not super cut and dry. And again, I think that it is a parent's choice, but not every child has the ability to wear the mask. or to even have the cognition to wash hands without a meltdown, or never mind use any hand sanitizer because his hands are always in his mouth. I don't want him eating those chemicals. So I know I've taken a lot of time, and I just want to bring out a different perspective. So you can clap for me or you cannot, I don't care. I just really want to let all of you know that there are children with severe and profound disabilities or needs that don't necessarily allow them the safety measures that your children have the choice to make.
So this is exhausted the list of individuals that are in person. Joseph, do we have any hands up virtually?
No hands up yet.
This brings to an end at this time the public section of the.
Excuse me, sir. Can I speak? I didn't sign the letter.
Sure. Just sign your name here. And you don't have to sign it now, just after you're done speaking.
My name is John Daniel. I'm from Exeter, Rhode Island. I have one student going to school. I'm retired from the United States Army. I was a nuclear, biological, and chemical defense NCO. And I was also a public school teacher. I taught Eastern civilization, Western civilization, and US history. There was an interesting study in Brown that just came out this week that showed that mass children, their IQ fell by 21 points. They went from 100 to 79. Something to be cognizant of if you're going to mask children up, that you're impacting directly their IQ. Also, children from birth to 30 years old have almost no, this doesn't impact them. This hits people with 5 comorbidities related to special needs. Those are the people that have to worry about it. Healthy adults don't need to be concerned about this. This is going to greatly impact the children where they don't have the visual signs to communicate with other children with smiles, with grimaces. They're not being socialized correctly. So they're, again, the IQ has fallen by 21%. That study was done on, I believe, between 500 and 700 children in the state of Rhode Island, all white middle-class children, just like the children who go to the school from. This masked them up, it will devastate them. Also, we reached herd immunity last June, not this past June, June before. That's according to a doctor at Yale University. There's a great deal of impact that can happen to these poor children. You mask them up, you're isolating them. It was fascinating to come in here after everybody's been back. You have social distancing still in effect. It's cold, whatever. But this is going to do a permanently change. When you go to basic training, you go for 3.5 months. You've all seen Full Metal Jacket. You see that? You see that? It is going to change you permanently after 3.5 months. Watch Full Metal Jacket, you'll understand why. You've been locked down for 1.5 years. You cower from one another. You don't trust one another. You reach out with hate. You argue over nonsense. It's time to bring some healing back into this. Reach out with kindness, love, and understanding. It's the team effort here. But remember, they reduced the child's IQ by 21 points. It went from 100 to 79. Mask them up. You're going to have long-term issues where these children will be unemployable. Think of the suicides. Any of us who have police scanners, fire scanners, I've never heard this in my life. I've heard 3 murder-suicides in Rhode Island, 1 in Connecticut. A gentleman around the corner from me cut his own throat in the bathroom. And 2 weeks ago, somebody drank half a bottle of bleach. What you are doing has a direct impact on people
far beyond what you realize. Please forget the mask. Those of you who've been vaccinated, you're safe. You have no worries. But the impact on these children is going to be endless. I went to basic training 30 years ago, and I still do things certain ways after 30 years. So keep that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. I'm going to take one person, the person that we have at this time. Raising hand raised virtually, if they can communicate somehow. I'm not exactly sure how they will. And then, is there another individual that wants to speak?
Sorry. Late.
Robin, you asked for a sign.
Oh, and one thing, custodians, I see them all the time down at the high school. They do a fabulous job.
Thank
They need a plaque.
Thank you, sir. Joe, do you have some means of communicating with the individual?
Yeah, she can just start talking. I have her unmuted, but I'm waiting.
All right.
Hi. My name is Amy Vadney. I'm a West Greenwich resident. I voiced my concerns many times over to unmask our children, to the governor, the Department of Health, our superintendent, who I think is doing a great job overall and always there to communicate back with me very quickly, and I appreciate that. But I do support, I would say the majority of what I've heard tonight is that we need to unmask our children. I don't think it's safe for them to be in masks all day long. I don't like wearing a mask all day long. I'm a teacher in Warwick at the high school level. So yes, we can get vaccinated, but I feel bad for the students who cannot get vaccinated. My son's 7-year-old going into 2nd grade. He can't get vaccinated. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure I want to get him vaccinated. I'm not even sure I'd let him get vaccinated at this point. I just think at this point, it's the parent's choice. There should not be a mandate to have our children masked. I feel like we live in America, and lately I don't think we do. I don't see how it's not even, I just get frustrated talking about it. But basically, I just want to support everyone there who did say, yes, let's unmask the children. I'm totally supporting of that. I understand everybody has a choice. If you want to mask your child because it makes you feel safer, 100% mask your child. I have my own family members who feel that way. I don't feel that way. I want my child to go to school and see other people's lips and the teachers' lips who are vaccinated, as I myself am as an educator. So I just really wanted to voice my opinion, and that was it. Thank you all for doing a great job, and I hope you do take our voices into consideration, even though I'm sure you do already have an idea of how you're going to vote. But thank you very much.
Young lady, you wanted to.
Hi, how are you? I appreciate you calling me young. I was watching this entire thing online. I live down the street. I was feeding the kids dinner. So I decided to have my husband take over, lucky him, and come on down and, tell you about my son. My son is autistic. He goes to school at Wallalone, and he has been masked for the entire last year. He's also gone to Lina. And you guys did, I've heard a lot about how it lowers children's IQs, and I disagree. My son is intelligent. He was able to learn to speak. He's done it. The teachers at Wallalone and at Lina have all done an excellent job with him. And he has learned, he's blossomed, even with a mask on. And I'm sorry you all got hurt. You kind of all got handed like a turd sandwich. Like, everyone is unhappy. I'm sorry, I'm nervous a little bit. I wasn't, I was totally fine sitting there. Everyone kind of got handed a turd sandwich, and unfortunately for you guys, it's going to be your job to keep all the kids safe, no matter what the percentage is. even if it's 0.001%. And I'm sorry, but you guys have done a wonderful job the last year with what you had to work with. And it's my hope that you continue to keep our kids safe. And I will tell you that my son's IQ has not been lowered. He was talking to me this morning about the different atmospheres on planets, and I'm sitting there Googling to make sure, you know, that he's right, and he is. So I can assure you that he's learned how to talk, he's learned how to communicate, he is blossoming into a wonderful young man, and he did this unmasked and masked as well. That's all I've got. Thank you very much.
So at this time, you're going to end the public section of new policies. Proceed to our next agenda item. Business, EWG 5-year district plan 21-25. Approval discussion.
So this is included, this was included in the packet. A little bit of background, there was some legislation that was passed in 2019 that redefines the district strategic planning process and the school improvement planning process and responsibilities. One of the things that we've been waiting for is the template from the Department of Education and the set of guidelines around what exactly a new strategic plan must entail. But we did finally get that this summer, which is why we have now put it into the template and we're ready to share. There are requirements per legislation that strategic plans need to include outcome improvement plans, meaning state testing improvement plans. The district strategic plan must align with the Department of Education's strategic plan, which this one does. And then the individual school improvement plans need to be aligned to the district plan. And basically, we set the broader goals, which you can see I've broken down really into 4 categories. It is about responsive instruction, excellence in learning, and in excellence in learning is where the improvement plans, the outcome improvement plans for state testing need to be. And then also how we further engage our communities, and that includes parents and students, how we increase their voice in the decision-making process. Those 3 things are connected directly to what the Department of Ed is requiring and what legislation requires. I've included all of the data. We've set pretty rigorous goals for 5 years out. And then you'll notice we've also included something very specific for Exeter West Greenwich, which is the capital facilities improvements. That is a process that is pretty involved and that will take us multiple years to get through. But you'll notice after that, we then go to a section called the Exeter West Greenwich District Annual Plan. So it starts out really broad and then it starts to funnel down. So on an annual basis, I need to update the district strategic plan with specific goals and action steps for that year that will move us toward the rigorous goals that we set for 5 years out. So there are specific items that we've already been working on. We didn't wait for the draft of the strategic plan to come out. We knew what our focus areas would be. So it is a little bit more broad, but it is more narrow than the broader goals that are listed for the 5-year plan. Then we bring this annual plan and the strategic plan to the building levels. And this is what we worked on Monday. Was that yesterday? Okay, that was yesterday. At the retreat, the first day of the retreat with our building administrators was held yesterday. And we worked with them on looking specifically at the data for their school that is connected to the action steps and the goals that we've set at the district level, because school by school, the data looks quite different. And so they're writing specific goals for their school and very specific action steps for their school that are aligned to what we've provided for them at the district level, aligned to the 5-year goals, aligned to the goals of the Department of Education. So it's kind of a new process, but it requires an annual update, and it is very specific. And what I said to the administrators yesterday is we need to focus always on outcomes, because that is what the Department of Ed is requiring. That's what the new legislation requires. I know that's what members of the school committee are looking for as well. It's what I've been looking for. So we started that process with administrators yesterday. We're continuing with that process on Thursday, which is day 2 of our retreat. And then the building administrators will be working with their staff and their broader communities to share, get additional feedback and recommendations, hone the action steps, and then bring forward their specific action steps for their building for the long term and also for the 21-22 school year. And each year thereafter, I need to bring you their specific goals for the year so that you can see that we are making continuous progress towards those broader goals that were set. So that's what the process looks like. I wanted you to see the draft of our school, our district strategic plan, how it kind of funnels down into the annual plan. And then I want you also to see, once the schools are done, how it funnels down to very specific actionable plans for their buildings based on their own data, with the desire to see improved outcomes at the end.
Questions or comments from the committee members?
I have a couple of questions on priority areas. I guess 4th page. Under measurable goals, the second one, I don't really understand this. By July 2025, the achievement gap that exists between students with disabilities and those without a disability will decrease by 25% in ELA and math is measured by the YCAS, SAT, BLM, alternative assessments. What was it? What percentage?
So I just want to make sure that it's being read correctly. Let's say that the gap between students without disabilities and students with disabilities was 40 points, 40 percentage points. The goal is to decrease that gap by 25%. So therefore, the gap would shrink from 40% to 30%, because the gap needs to close. Okay. And again, it looks really different from school to school. In some schools, the gap is small. In other schools, the gap is larger. So by setting the district goal, then we need to make sure that the schools are writing for rigorous targets such that when we put them all together, the gap for the district closes by 25%. It is comparable to what the Department of Education has included for their gap closing goal at the state level, and that's why we mirrored our goals after what the Department of Ed is indicating they would like to see. And those assessments, BRICAS is the state assessment for elementary up to middle school. The SAT, is the high school assessment, and DLM is it is a special education assessment that is designed for up to 1% of the population, special education population. It's for students who are significantly impacted by their disability. And so the assessment and their standards are different. Therefore, the assessment needs to look different. But by law, only 1% of the population. They do count towards our overall rates for the district, however.
Also on page our measurable goals by July 2025, 75% of students will achieve proficiency in English learning, ELA, as measured by the RICAS, SAT, ELA, alternative assessment, an increase of 19% over 18-19 district results. Not too bad. Is
But
that
so the-
enough over 5 years?
So again, it's consistent with what RIDE is asking for, but remember that this is at the district level, right? And as we know, the results from school to school are very different. So, for example, at the high school, the percentage of children who are already proficient in ELA is high. Therefore, in order for us to show, and they're included in this data, so in order for us to show that 19% increase at the district level, you can't count on the high school to see a 19% increase because their starting point is high. Meaning that the schools where there is a greater need to see improvement, their goal has to be greater in order for the district to hit the 19% improvement mark. And that's the importance of looking at this from a school-based perspective and setting very specific goals for a school in order for, when we put all the data together, it will help us to achieve the district goal. It needs to be real strategic alignment, which we've done, but I will say not necessarily to the level that we're required to do now. So you'll see, for example, the Metcalf goals were quite different than the high school goals when you get a chance to look at their school, individual school action plans for the 21-22 school year, which will be coming early in the school year.
So I think that's brought us down.
Correct, that's correct.
Any other member questions?
Yeah, I have a question on that gap.
Go ahead, Joe.
If everybody is increasing, couldn't there always be a gap there that everybody's kind of achieving that?
So if everybody is increasing at the same rate, yes, the gap will always exist. But the whole goal for students receiving specialized instruction, the students that have special education services, is to close the gap. So we need to see that as a result of the specialized instruction that is being provided, while everybody is expected to grow a year at a time, the reason for the specialized instruction is to intensify that instruction to close the achievement gap. So yes, everybody achieves, but ultimately the students that have a gap, they need to achieve more in order to move closer to where they should be, the grade level where they should be. So it's the whole purpose of specialized instruction. It's a hard job, but we need to see the results.
These are across district level goals, district with a 2025 extended period of time. It's 5 years, of course. Strategic. So that's strategic, and then there's tactical implementation, building level implementation. We know we have a problem at the elementary school, or a big positive swing at the junior high. That's fantastic. We went from one extreme to the next extreme. Hopefully that's not going to change. And like Metcalf, we had 2 consecutive years. So from a tactical perspective, building perspective, our expectations aren't going to be like this. In other words, we want to see.
Yeah, Metcalf's plan will look very different than the district plan because their starting point is very different.
Sure it is.
So when those plans are drafted, they are required to be shared and viewed and commented on by the governing body. So we will see that. But I needed to start with this so that we could work our way down. We already started to do that, even though it hasn't been to the school committee for review and comment yet.
So unless there isn't any other questions or comments from the committee, I'd like to move the motion at this time for approval of the 5 years strategic plan.
So
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nays? Abstentions? Thanks.
Thank you.
Unfinished business. We were waiting on exit home aid reimbursement issue regarding to award. Did we get any response from the Rhode Island Department of Education's legal department?
I did speak to Mr. Hennius. Mr. Hennius did have a conversation, extended conversation with Mr. Capone, who is the chief legal counsel at the department. They went over the particular question that you had. Mr. Capone didn't feel comfortable issuing an informal decision and thought that it would be better addressed by way of an advisory opinion. So we, Andrew, Mr. Hennius, will prepare a letter to the department requesting an advisory opinion. We can bring that before the committee so the committee can review it to make sure that we are addressing the particular issue that you are looking for and give us authorization to file with the department. So that's where we stand. Again, I think the next step is to together that letter from advisory.
So our legal department, HCO, is going to write a letter requesting an advisory opinion from the Rhode Island Department of Education. Do we have a period? Do we have any kind of expectation when we might hear back from them?
That I do not know. I know that they are struggling. It appears with keeping up with their caseload at the time. I do know that they're down hearing officers. I'm not quite sure what their timetable would be.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Thank you.
Just one other point. I will. I'll speak with Mr. Hennies tomorrow about this. So as far as the time period,
School committee legal representation. There's no updates on that.
That'll be in the packet next week.
Thank you. Charter review committee update. It's going to represent that.
I can, as a recording secretary, I can. So we met, we had a pretty good committee. I'm in possession of some documentation that needs to be forwarded out to the committee. We're scheduled to meet again on August 25th. 6 p.m. here. Again, the meeting went for about an hour. It was a pretty general discussion about how the different enrollment for the regionals is handled, the apportionment of enrollments for the regional school district is handled around the state. And I think we're on a good glide path to coming to some decision, or at least some information that can be shared with the school committee and the town councils. Greg Coucher, former school committee chair, is the chairperson, and I think Mike Lefebvre, who's on the screen, is the vice chair. So,
I was.
You want to add anything?
I was at the meeting as well, and I think we were going to provide some spreadsheet data for the committee members. Next meeting, 20. All right. Does anybody have any questions?
Just one quick one. Could you provide a list of the areas in the charter that the charter review subcommittee is looking at? I know we went into the portion of the town, but there might be some more stuff they decide to look at. So we can see that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Next item, 21, 22, return to school guidance updates. Jim.
So without going into a tremendous amount of detail, I did run 2 community forums last night. And I went over the first template that is required to be submitted to the Department of Ed prior to our return. This was the LEA back to school plan for mitigation. So it was really about health and safety. The next document that I need to submit is towards the end of the month, and it is about academic and social emotional responses. How are we going to address those needs, which we know are having. So last night at the forum, I spent about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and 30 minutes. I think it was about an hour and 15 minutes each. We had a total, I think I told you earlier, a total of about 700 views and or individuals that were on those calls live, whether through Zoom, watching on YouTube, or who watched the YouTube link later, were able to track hits on that. Over 700, which is probably the most widely attended forum I've had in the last, well, ever, if I can say that. And so this was submitted to RIDE on Friday, last Friday. The template was released to us on August 1st. I was on vacation until August 6th. So, and then August 9th was a holiday. So 10th through the 13th is what we had to work with. I mean, obviously we'd all been talking about this stuff already, but we put it into the template during those short number of days, submitted it to RIDE on Friday, held the forums on Monday. And you know, what I went over is masking. That's the big one. It's where all the questions came from. Most of the questions came from. Symptom screening, physical distancing, testing, and quarantine. So I'll just say a couple of things about quarantine because that is the area where the most significant changes have occurred from the guidance from the CDC and the Department of Health. The quarantine guidance is now less restrictive, meaning the total number of days of required quarantine for individuals who must has gone from 14, which was the gold standard, to as little as 7 next year, as long as there's a negative test that is provided on day 5 or later. And if there isn't a negative test, as long as the child is symptom-free, they can return after 10 days. So either way, it's a pretty significant decrease in the required quarantine period, which means our kids will be back in school sooner, and that's a positive thing. The other change is that the vaccination status of the child and whether or not the child was masked and whether or not other mitigation strategies are in place could mean that some children who are even within 3 feet of an infected child may not need to quarantine. So if they're vaccinated, for example, and masked, for example, it's no longer black and white. Everybody has to quarantine for 14 days. You have to look at multiple variables, what mitigation strategies are in place, and it could actually eliminate the need for quarantine, which was not even an option last year. So I went over in a lot of detail those details with the community last night and tried to answer all of their questions. And I've been working on a summary document of our conversations. There were a couple of questions that I needed to do a little bit more research on. I'm waiting for the answers on those before I send out the document. But it will go out to the community and I will copy the school committee on it as well. So I just report that we're on track with our required transmissions. I've done the community forums. We have talked about it as an administrative team and we feel good about where we are, ready to reopen. The next template will be related to the academic and social emotional supports. And you already have an idea about what a lot of those things look like because I tied our ESSER funding directly to the additional supports that we have included in our budget.
Is there any questions or comments from the membership? Yes, go ahead.
All right, so one question I have, when you're talking about quarantining, so the kids that are quarantined, we don't have distance learning, so they're not they're not learning, right? So they're just home for the quarantine this time around.
So that's, let me try to answer that question. You guys still here? I mean, I've been talking with our union president on this. The children will not be home without access to anything. Right? We are still responsible for their learning, particularly if they're quarantining or isolating for extended periods of time. So we are making, and in fact, I have to address that question in the next template that gets submitted, right? Which is why I've been engaged in discussions with the union. Just keep in mind that while in many cases it may be appropriate for the children to still join virtually, it won't always be appropriate, because one thing that will be different next year is we can go back to activities, group work, labs, experiments, things that we weren't really doing much of last year because the restrictions were so significant. You can't replicate a chemistry lab on a Google Meet. So while sometimes what's happening in the classroom, it would be appropriate and fairly easy for the teacher to include a child virtually, other times it might just be an alternative assignment, a video, something that they provide to Google Classroom. But everybody agrees that there will be some work and instruction and direction that is provided. It will just vary depending on what the activity is planned for that class for that day. And at the elementary level, I mean, again, it could look really different, but it might be, join us virtually for this portion of the day, and then here are some things for you to work on independently for this portion of the day. So it might be a combination. That is something that we continue to talk through, but it will be part of that template that I have to submit before the end of the month. That will be shared with this group.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can see how maybe sixth graders and above would be able to navigate and join a class and participate, but the elementary would be concerning. And then with the working parent, they would have to provide the instruction and guidance. So if a child is, let's say when we're talking about the situation with, and again, I know you don't know all the answers to this, but these are the things I think we really have to dive into, aside from the masking, is that like we've already experienced a lot of learning loss. So when we're talking about quarantining, you mentioned that there might be less quarantining if the child is masked. Can you explain, do you have any idea about if it's the child who tests positive, that then the children around them?
Let me read you the guidance. So unvaccinated students who were within 0 to 3 feet of the infected student in an indoor classroom for a total of 15 minutes over a 24-hour period must quarantine. Last year it was vaccinated or unvaccinated within 6 feet must quarantine. Now it's 0 to 3 feet and only unvaccinated must quarantine regardless, right? But if a child is unvaccinated and they were within 3 to 6 feet, so that outside of that last year's window of an infected student, same in an indoor classroom, 15 minutes over a 24-hour period, they do not need to quarantine if and only if both students were masked and the school is following the most recent state guidance on ventilation, which we will, and that there are 1 or more additional K-12 prevention strategies in place, which will be the case across the board, right? So that's important, that if a child, even if the child is unvaccinated, if both the child who was positive and the child who was considered a close contact were masked, all the other things will be in place. Quarantine will not be required. Vaccinated children do not need to quarantine. They need to monitor for symptoms, but they don't need to quarantine. So there are some benefits in terms of the guidance from the Department of Health. There are some benefits for masking and benefits for vaccination as it relates to required quarantine periods.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I'm really interested to hear about what the plan is for kids who are quarantined, because as a former classroom teacher, teaching one class with all of the barriers and attendance being, you know, a bit sporadic, if you will, for some, having to do that for 2 learning environments also on a daily basis. If I have some kids at home, some, you know, kids in my class, you know, we're talking about testing scores for children and having a goal of a 19% increase. It's going to be really hard to achieve that if we don't have kids in school. Thank you. That was it.
Any of the other membership have questions regarding this topic? Jim, I thought I read just quickly that our update plan have to be ready and approved by the 24th.
The mask?
No, yeah, I'm sorry. We're on the return to school guidance.
So the first plan had to be submitted by the 13th, which it was. And the second plan is, it is sometime next week, mid to end of next week.
So we're ready to meet that date.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. And I'll share, I won't have anything formal to share at the next meeting, but I'll have some informal, and then I'll share with you an actual copy of what we submitted.
I thought the commissioner said something about the 24th.
Yes, I wrote it down. Actually, I might have it right here. Let me just check. You could be right. 27. The final reopening template due to ride on the 27th.
Okay.
And our teachers are returning on 30.
Very good.
And one other thing, in terms of our orientation day for teachers, so, you know, think about what's happening with the pandemic and the thought of me bringing 250 certified, non-certified administrative staff together in an auditorium. It's a little scary. We've made some provisions to have an outdoor football field graduation style event where we can have them spread out in the football field, and that's required. So whoever or whatever you believe in, pray for no rain.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry.
Right.
One last question about attendance. I understand that I think it's the Rhode Island Department of Ed has requirements for attendance for children. How many absences is seen? You know, does a child need to have in order to throw up a red flag for truancy?
That, if I may answer that,
Sure.
that varies. It all depends on circumstances. I mean, generally speaking, it really depends. The truancy process is a brutal process, and it doesn't, to be quite honest with you, it does not work. Oftentimes, you know, whether school makes phone calls to the parents, that type of early outreach probably could happen at a relatively early stage when there's certain patterns are starting to arise. But the actual enforcement in the truancy courts is a whole other ballgame. In certain districts, just simply are not enforcing, you know, that particular provision. Others are doing it. Others are taking a more targeted approach based on students with higher needs that are missing time. So it really does vary.
And if the question is related to the, you know, based on where we are, right, we expect the kids to be absent more.
Yeah.
So if they are directed to stay home because of guidance from the Department of Health, then it is an excused absence, and an excused absence does not count towards a child's truancy petition. You can't have that. If they were required to be absent for CDC, Department of Health guidance, you can't bring truancy court as a result of that. But interestingly, you also referenced the accountability system from the Department of Education, and that is a variable that's included. So It's the chronic absenteeism rate. And chronic absenteeism is defined as 10% or more of the required school days, 180 days, 10%, 18 days. And it doesn't matter under the current guidance if those absences are excused or unexcused. If it's 18 days absence from learning, they're considered chronically absent. So last year, there were some modifications to the requirements that were made. So they reported the information to us, but they didn't use it to determine accountability because of the circumstances that we were in. They have not made any special provisions for 21-22 at this point. The last I heard, they weren't planning on it, but that was during the time of the lowest transmission rates that we had since the pandemic started. Much earlier in the summer, and now the outlook is just really different. So I think RIDE needs to address it, but they haven't done it yet. The good news is they did do it for the 2021 school year. So I would anticipate if we have similar problems.
I guess more of my question was, what does RIDE consider too many absences for a child's education?
I mean,
sounds like
chronic is defined as 10%.
Okay.
But even that is too much.
Yeah.
If we start seeing patterns, the guideline says if you're looking at 2 to 3 absences in September, you should start reaching out to the family, putting some things in place to encourage and require more frequent attendance, because on that track, you have 2 to 3 absences per month, you will be chronically absent by the end. So what we don't want to do is wait until the kid's at 15, 16, 17 days to intervene. It just won't be effective. But if you start in September, you have the possibility of turning that around. That's why, and I think our teachers and our administrators have done a really good job. Our chronic absentee rates across the district are really low. And we always, prior to last year, we always scored the maximum number of points for that category of the accountability system across all schools in the district, because it's something that we address really well. Obviously, the circumstances are different.
Right, but if a student quarantines 3 times, that's 21 absences.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we will push for RIDE to make the accommodation. One, we can't hold us accountable for that if the Department of Health is saying you can't come to school. It's not our problem. It's not the child's fault. So that'll be our.
I'm really happy.
All right, capital project update on discussion. Bob, you're the man on the spot.
So there is an enclosure in your packet, which I'll go through in a moment. The project is moving along at breakneck pace. The contractors and subcontractors were in, the GC and the subcontractors were in Saturday working overtime. They're scheduled to be in this coming Saturday. Basically what they're doing is they're getting all the occupied space. So the hallways, the cafeterias, anywhere where they needed to install VAVs or ERVs as part of the HVAC system in the areas where students and staff will be occupied, to get those in place and buttoned up. I say buttoned up, they had to cut through hard ceiling, and then they had to remove, which would be like your solid wall, your chipboard at home. And then they have the grids like you see above us here. Move those out to get access to the HVAC up above there. Again, in the common areas of getting those things back in place. Some of that replacement is brand new. Most of it is. Some of it we were able to save or was not targeted for replacement because it was fairly new. Even with those units and with those places, with the units in place and the ceiling and the areas cleaned up, there still will be a requirement to go back and do the final connection for some of the electrical components and the control unit components, but that can happen after school hours. The focus really is to say, is what we're keep asking the contractor and the subs, what is this going to look like with 1,000 people in it? Roughly, that's what it's going to look like with the students and the faculty and staff. So they're feeling pretty confident that that will be ready. There will be some areas particular sensitive, the auditorium, the guidance area, and the offices. It will be a little bit of a lag before the air conditioning is working in those areas. Some could be substantial as far as, October, but some could be, later, mid-September. So there's a lot going on there. As far as the actual overall project itself, the main constraint to being complete is going to be the rooftop units, which are really the biggest components of the project. They're the ones that are going to provide the air makeup and the cooling and the heating for the system. Those were pushed out to October 15th as a delivery date, meaning that they would be in the contractor's possession at that point, but not necessarily on site. So we're trying to work through that. In ATC, who is acting as a general contractor, automatic temperature control, they have a great relationship with these folks, but you only have to turn on the news or try to order something yourself in your own personal life. I'm sure you're suffering from the supply chain being problematic. At this point, we feel, or ATC is saying, that they are on target for the October 15th delivery, take possession, and then get the internet in place. Can't say enough about Steve and his guys. They're really working. Steve Bailey, facilities director, he's Johnny on the spot working with these guys and keeping them moving. The contractors and the subs are doing great work, so appreciate that. There's a building committee meeting tomorrow night, and that's where I'll pivot to the document that's in your packet. So there are a couple of things that are near and dear to the school committee as far as the fiscal impact and some of the, the timing of what's ahead of us here as far as the fiscal impact. So looking at the blue page, and excuse the font, but these came to me in PDF, so I could not really remanipulate them too much. But if you are looking at the blue page, what you have on the top, beginning at the top, is the schedule after the bond sale. So that's the schedule of a $10 million bond issue and a $5 million issue. And then below that, you have the projected schedule, which we made public in April of 2021. And again, that was a $5 million bond issuance. In the most right-hand column, there is in very blurry total net debt service. And if you look at the schedule after bond sale and this projected schedule, which was April 21st or April 2021, you can see in April of 2021, we were predicting or projecting a $376,000 bond payment due in 2023. Due to the favorable market conditions, we are now projecting a $304,000 debt service payment in 2023. So that's roughly a $72,000 savings to the school district. So that's a very positive outcome, and it's market favorability to us. If you're looking at this and you really want to strain your eyes, just keep in mind that moving from the right-hand column, which shows the total net debt service, the next column over, that's going to be the $5 million bond issuance, and you can see that in the principal column at the very bottom. The total says $5 million, and then you can see over on the as you move progressing to the left, the The first issue was the $10 million, which, was really an $8.9 million, but for those of us who sat there signing all the papers, we understand a little bit about premium bonds versus non-premium bonds. So, effectively, it's a $10 million, $5 million issue. So that's good news, I feel, for the committee and for planning purposes, and as we prepare for the 2023 budget in a couple of short months. The second document, which is the Downs document, if you look at it, reading from left to right, starting in the upper left, it's Downs in its beginning January 21, and it begins to show as you move through the months of 21, you can start to see where there's activity. And through August of 21, you can see that we've had invoices in a total of $1,062,000, and below that in super blurry, which you probably cannot read, is the pay-as-you-go reimbursement that the district is entitled to, and then what our share of it would be. Significant to this is moving to the right, December of 21, we should have a total spend at that time of about $5.1 million. Moving to the lower half of the page, we start on January of 22, and you can see that by May of 22, really April or May of 22, we are in the range of, actually it's May and June of 22, $6.9 million for a cumulative spend in May, and then $9.2 million for a cumulative spend in June. That would be based on anticipated invoicing. So somewhere probably around March, we're going to have to go back out to bond for that $5 million. So it's all that issuance and then all that paperwork that the chair and the vice chair signed, came to the central office and signed for us. So we get to do that bond issuance drill one more time, but significant to the school committee and to the building committee, and I think we have a building committee member in the audience, is that in December of 22, we will have spent the $17.8 million, and we will have completed all the projects that we have just spent the past 2 years trying to get approved and at the state, local, town, school committee level. So we moved through that money and the projects pretty quickly. And this is just a pitch, as we go through it, probably the community will not be ready for the issuance of a bond. So as we look at the fund balances that we have and the monies left over from any of these project monies, we need to be thinking about the self-funding model that we just came out of, that the school committee did prior to going to bond. So we remember we self-funded for roughly almost $3 million. We went out, we did the $17 million bond issuance, but by December of 22, we will have spent all the bond money. We will have completed all the projects on Firewood Ride, and we will have to kind of come up with a new plan. So it's a never-ending cycle.
And we have to come up with that new plan because there's a minimum amount that we have to spend. There's a payments of effort for expenses related to improvements, right? So we always have to spend money to make sure that our facilities are up to date. So I think you're right. We'll have to look at self-funding and not go back to the town. One other thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but the blue charts are showing already a savings based on what was projected. But remember that these are still based on the projection of a 66% reimbursement. And we have a base of 61. The 66% is one bonus, but the potential exists for us to get additional bonuses, which would once that is established, it would bring the net debt service numbers down even further. So we're already projecting, not projecting, we know that there are savings based on what was originally projected. But once we get the actual final statement on sure the bonuses that we qualified for, there's a high chance that we are going to qualify for much more than the 66%. If that happens, the impact on the town will be even less than what you see here. So just keep that in mind as well.
I know that was a lot. So there's two really components. There's the physicality of the projects, and then there's the financial part. And one will hurt you, one will kill you. You've been decided.
Questions or comments from the membership? It's getting close, I think, to the end of our presentation, but I do have a question about, it's those 2 units that you and I spoke about that are delayed. I'd like the committee to know by how long, by how much they're going to delay just the large units, what they were planned to be delivered by, when they are going to be delivered by, and once they are delivered, they're going to be up and running by what, October 15th?
No. So they will be, so they were hoping to have those available initially in August and then installed and in place for September. Now they are talking about having them in their yard. So they'll take possession of them on 10/15, and then the riggers will bring them out and begin the installation, and that requires coordination. So it would be, in all likelihood, if it all goes as planned, before the end of October, they'll be up and installed and connected by November 1st.
They signed on the dotted line. They signed it.
They did. There's actually a no dollar value change order that says that if they are not in place by October 15th, that they will have heat and air ventilation in place, which is basically, I think they're gonna hold to that. But our goal is to say, as I say to them, you got to run with the bad news. You cannot slow walk if this is going to go longer than 10/15. You've got to come to us. And they're holding that, 10/15 is the date that they're going to take possession.
Session. And then, again, when are they actually going to show up?
Somewhere between the 10/15 and the end of the month, they'll be up and put in place and on our rooftops.
That's going to be done on a weekend.
It could be, in all likelihood, it would be, given that we'll be back in session. But I can tell you that the crane, when it was here, there'll be another crane on site on either Monday or Tuesday. It's pretty low impact. I mean, it doesn't require a big footprint, so,
We're always concerned about safety.
Yeah.
Why we had discussed earlier about having it done on a weekend. As remote as it may be, an accident while school's, in session. That's why we thought the weekend would be the ideal time discussion. So if that's any different, then I think we need to know about that. Important dates and meetings. Tuesday, August 24th is the next school committee meeting that will be required. Tuesday, September 14th, school committee meeting. Tuesday, September 28th, school committee meeting. I need a motion for adjournment.
Before you adjourn, I want to just read this because you will all get word of this immediately after the meeting. It will be all over the news. And this says the Rhode Island Council of Elementary and Secondary Education just voted to instruct RIDE not to approve any back-to-school plans that don't include a mask mandate. And the vote came after the RIDE lawyer said they didn't have the authority to mandate masks statewide, so that was their approach. So I don't know what it means. I don't know what the interpretation is. I don't know what the backlash would be, but just know that the conversation was happening at the Department of Education today, and that's what was just released to superintendents. So it is going to probably impact our conversation for next week, and I just want you to hear it because it will be all over the news. when we get it.
I just want to make sure I understand because I wasn't expecting that, of course.
Neither was I.
Who says they require it?
The Rhode Island Council on Elementary and Secondary Education, which is the board that oversees RIDE,
Okay,
voted to instruct RIDE not to approve any back-to-school plans that don't include a mask mandate.
required.
So that may change everything.
Oh, all right. Let's get back to adjournment. I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hey. Good evening.